Peter Svidler looks like he's on excellent form in this candidates tournament. In round 2, he defeated Andreikin very smoothly. And today in round 3, he had Vladimir Kramnik on the ropes. This is the position after move 40. And you can see that Svidler has this strong pass pawn on d6. He pressed on with queen c6. So he wants the rook to retreat, and then the pawn marches on, and black is in massive trouble. But Kramnik had a chance to think at this moment. The time control had been reached, and he found a defence. He played pawn to e4. Well, that's already quite a remarkable move. Instead of defending the rook or moving the rook, he counterattacks. So if queen takes, then the rook can simply take the pawn and everything's fine. So let's go back. So if queen takes rook, then pawn takes rook. And black, of course, has sufficient counterplay in this position. So after e4, this pawn had to be taken. Well, okay, what's the point of this? Okay, now we can see the queen comes to e2. Suddenly, white's king position has been prized open. So apart from the threat to the rook, there's a threat to take on g4. So instead of, for example, queen takes rook, which would allow queen takes rook, and, well, white can't hold everything together. He can't protect his pawn on d6 and protect his king. So Svidler played rook f3. So it still looks like he's got everything under control, because the rook blocks the queen's route to g4. And after rook takes pawn, well, the d pawn has gone, but then the queen came in to attack this weak f7 pawn, and this really can't be defended. Of course, black would very much like to bring the queen back here, but that square is covered by the pawn. So Kramnik had to play f6, which leaves his king exposed, and then e5 from Svidler, a great move. And again, Kramnik looked like he was on the ropes. Desperate situation. If this pawn is taken, then white transposes into a winning king and pawn ending like this. This is all forced, and now the bishop pins. The rook must be protected, and now before you take the rook, here's the trick. You take the pawn, and after this, then white simply simplifies into a winning king and pawn ending. The king hoovers up like this, while black is taking care of that pawn. Easy win for white. Nice piece of calculation. So it looks as though Kramnik was completely lost here, but the defence he found was nothing short of miraculous. Absolutely superb piece of calculation and creativity, actually. f5. So if rook takes pawn, then the queen breaks through again. But of course, pawn takes pawn. Now there's this powerful pawn duo. It doesn't look like this is terribly good for black. But now, this remarkable defence, rook f6. So first of all, the rook blocks the march of the f-pawn. The rook cannot be taken because there's a pin. So that's the first thing. But it looks as though white ought to be able to break this. White is a pawn up. Black's king is a bit exposed. It looks very strange indeed. Surely white can win this. Well, what happens, for example, if you bring the queen away from out of this pin? So now the threat is just to take here. Well, now black can take the pawn and queen g4, and you pick up the rook, and black is fine. White's king is too exposed. Okay, well, what about pushing the e-pawn? But then queen e4. And again, there's a threat, well, to take, well, no, not to take on f5, because there's a deadly check on g6, but the threat is, for example, to start hassling the king with queen g4 check. And basically, white really can't do anything here. What? Sorry, actually, the real threat, now I've sorted myself out, the real threat is to play g4, of course. at exploiting this pin. So if the king comes up to get out of the pin, but then the queen just checks, and queen e4, and it's good enough for a draw. It's quite extraordinary. So in this position, Svidler tried king g3, and now queen e4, and remarkably, white simply can't make progress in this position. He tried bishop c5, but that left. Of course, there are certain threats here, but this leaves the king open. If the king comes back, you just keep checking. And in the game, bishop f2 was played, and Svidler saw nothing better than to allow this repetition of the position. Just a brilliant defence from Kramnik. Okay, well, the next game I'd like to look at from round 3 is the game between Mamedyarov and Anand. Mamedyarov with the white pieces, and it was a Slav opening. Of course, Anand is a great expert in the Slav, and they reached this position after 14 moves. But black is very comfortable here. This bishop, well protected by this pawn on a very nice outpost. This bishop also on a good diagonal. Of course, white has, at the moment, an imposing centre, but Anand dealt with this very well by playing e5. This position had actually been reached before in a game between Ivanchuk and Vallejo. Vallejo did not strike out with e5 and suffered in that game, but Anand, I think, makes a clear improvement with the e5. Excellent move, basically attacking the centre while white isn't very well developed. The rook is still in the corner. Very logical. So Anand has done his homework. The bishop came out. Anand traded. And now Vishy's next move I really like. Of course, you could just connect the rooks with a move like queen c7 or possibly queen e7 and play the rooks into the middle. Also not bad for black. But Vishy played this move, king h8. Looks rather mysterious. Very good move. If this pawn advances, so potentially threatening, then because the king has moved, the pawn can just come to f6. And well, apart from blocking out the bishop, it also holds up the advance of these pawns, but also prepares to bring the bishop back to this another excellent diagonal, if necessary, to hassle the queen and target the knight. Very good idea. Perhaps Mamedyarov should play f4. Instead, he played e5. Well, clearly he wanted to preempt this move f6, but it turns out this is a mistake. And once again, Vishy plays excellently in this position. He could play queen c7 or queen e7. These are both possible. But he played rook e8, targeting the e-pawn. Now, white would very much like to defend the pawn with the rook from e1, but of course this is impossible. It's also not possible to put a rook on the d file, because that square is also covered. So these two important central squares can't be used by white for his rooks, the natural squares for the rooks, and that is his problem in this game. So the pawn is attacked. Mamedyarov defended it with the f-pawn. Now this looks imposing, but Vishy breaks down the pawn chain straight away with f6. This is why this is such a strong move, because he's induced this advance, and actually this turns out to be a fatal weakness. Let's see what happens. So, I mean, this has to be taken. Now, this also has to be taken by black. Now, this is what Vishy wants. So he's opened up the position. He's got his rook on this excellent file. Already there's a threat to play bishop e2, winning an exchange. And the natural move here would be to put a rook into the middle to defend against that. It's not possible. So Mamedyarov had to play the bishop up. This was exchanged. But you can see the rooks aren't connected now. That's a problem. And Vichy can take the initiative straight away. And this pawn on f4 just creates a huge vacuum in white's position that black can fill. Later on, we'll see that this second rank is weak because the pawn has moved from f2. Not just that, this diagonal towards the king is also weakened because there's no pawn on f2. Very instructive how Vichy plays this position. So Mamedyarov sought to trade pieces to reduce the pressure on his position, but now the attacking wave number 2 hits Mamedyarov. The queen threatens the bishop. The queen moves over to this threatening position on the king side, looking at this diagonal, looking at the pawn on h2. And Mamedyarov really doesn't have a defense to the invasion of black's pieces. And now knight g4, threatening a mate on h2. I mean, it feels inevitable that Vichy is going to break through here. Queen c2 came back to defend along the second rank. And now a winning move from Vichy. c5, great move. Well, we'll see what happens in a second if this pawn is captured. But first, let me show you this variation, which I think illustrates why this pawn coming to f4 is such a weakness. Of course, this bishop could be taken and black wins a pawn, but this is actually a winning move. Of course, that pawn can't be taken by the queen because of mate. If knight d4, then the bishop cuts back, and that is a fatal pin. Again, all because that pawn moved from f2. Okay, so what happens if the knight retreats? Well then, this subtle move, rook d8, threatening rook d2, and there is no defense to the rook invasion. If the pawn were on f2, then of course there would be some chance of defending the king, but with the rook on d2, it's all over. The king is just getting mated in that position. So there we go. Think twice before you ever advance your f-pawn. After c5, this was taken. I mean, there's no better move. White is simply lost in this position. But this pin is the end for white. White cannot save the piece. If this knight is defended, then b6 simply wins. Mamedyarov tried rook d1, so okay, black's a little bit careful about the back rank mate. Vichy exchanged, that's just to simplify, and then solved any back rank issues with h6. Mamedyarov played king h1 and actually resigned in this position. Well, it would be a mistake to take this because of rook d8 check, but knight f2 is a simple winning move. Can't be taken by the bishop because the queen is on prise, and if queen takes knight, then queen takes rook, and you even win the bishop afterwards. Well, I thought that was a really smooth victory from Anand, who now takes the lead. But I have to say, I thought Mamedyarov made a massive mistake by playing into Anand's favourite opening, the Slav. But also, if you're going to do that, you need to have something very well prepared. And Mamedyarov had simply misjudged the position that they reached completely. Excellent game from Anand, who leads with 2.5. In second position, Kramnik and Svidler with 2 points. Tomorrow is a rest day. Round 4 is on Monday. See you then. Thanks for watching.